"Don't sign that contract!" Maid's daughter shouted. Billionaire CEO went pale instantly. The words echoed through the mahogany-paneled boardroom, freezing time itself, as all eyes darted between the unexpected intruder and the powerful man whose pen hovered mid-air. What happened next would change the course of multiple lives forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Elena Rivera had spent her entire life watching the Carrington empire from the margins. Growing up in the servants' quarters of the sprawling Charleston estate, she'd mastered the art of moving silently through rooms where billion-dollar decisions were made. Her mother, Anna Rivera, had worked as the Carrington family's housekeeper for over 20 years, her calloused hands bearing witness to countless late nights scrubbing floors while the elite danced above. "Keep your head down and your ears open," Anna had always advised, though Elena's brilliant mind refused to stay hidden. While dusting bookshelves in Sebastian Carrington's study, she'd memorized business terms from leather-bound volumes. During board meetings, she'd linger outside with fresh coffee, absorbing strategies and corporate maneuvers through mahogany doors. The young woman's intelligence was matched only by her complicated loyalty to the estate that both sheltered and excluded her. Each morning, Elena would watch Sebastian's luxury sedan depart for the gleaming Carrington Enterprises headquarters downtown, her chest tightening with a familiar mixture of resentment and something deeper she refused to name. Sebastian Carrington himself was Charleston royalty personified, his tailored suits and perfect posture projecting the confidence of 5 generations of wealth. Yet Elena had glimpsed something else beneath that polished exterior. The CEO maintained a fortress of control around himself, his voice never rising above a measured tone, even in crisis. Only his eyes, ice blue and penetrating, betrayed the vulnerability he'd buried since childhood. Few knew of the night 15 years ago when 10-year-old Elena had found young Sebastian hiding in the garden gazebo, tears streaming down his face after his father's particularly cruel tirade. She'd offered him half her sandwich without a word. The following day, he'd pressed something into her palm, a piano key necklace his mother had given him. "For courage," he'd whispered, before returning to his world of privilege. Elena still kept that necklace hidden in her dresser drawer, though Sebastian had never acknowledged their childhood interaction since. The young heir had been sent to boarding school shortly after, returning years later as the composed businessman who now commanded the boardroom with quiet authority. As Anna folded laundry in their modest quarters, she often studied her daughter with worried eyes. "This isn't our world, Elena," she would say, noticing how the young woman pored over business journals late into the night. But Anna couldn't extinguish the fire that burned in Elena, a determination forged from years of watching power from the shadows, waiting for her moment to step into the light. The Carrington Enterprises boardroom fell into a stunned silence, the mahogany table gleaming under the chandelier light as all eyes fixed on the document Elena Rivera had just slid across to Sebastian Carrington. The contract, what everyone had believed was a straightforward merger with Hartwell International, contained a poison pill hidden in Clause 27, subsection B. Elena had discovered it during her late-night review of the documents she'd accessed through her mother's cleaning pass. "This clause transfers complete control of the Carrington Foundation to Hartwell. Within 18 months, Elena explained, her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the air. The charitable foundation would be dissolved and its assets redistributed." Sebastian's face drained of color as he scanned the page. The foundation had been his mother's pride, her legacy to Charleston's underprivileged communities. His fingers tightened around the fountain pen he'd been about to sign with. "This is impossible," he murmured, looking up at Alan Prescott seated across from him. His godfather's expression remained carefully neutral, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Alan, did you review this?" "Of course I did," the older man replied smoothly. "It's standard acquisition language. The girl is overreacting." Elena stood her ground. "I've highlighted 3 other clauses that effectively strip the Carrington family of veto power over foundation decisions. This isn't standard language. It's a complete takeover disguised as a partnership." The board members began murmuring among themselves, papers rustling as they frantically flipped through their copies. Sebastian rose slowly, buttoning his suit jacket, a gesture that signaled both composure and authority. "The signing is postponed," he announced, his southern drawl more pronounced under stress. "We'll reconvene when our legal team has conducted a thorough review." Alan's face flushed crimson. "Sebastian, this delays everything by weeks. The Hartwell representatives have flown in specifically." Then they can enjoy Charleston's hospitality a while longer, Sebastian cut in, his tone glacial. Or they can fly home and return when we're satisfied. As the room emptied, Sebastian remained standing, staring at the contract as though it were a venomous snake. Elena lingered by the door, uncertain whether to leave or stay. "How did you find this?" he finally asked, not looking up. "I read everything," she answered simply, "and I know what the Foundation means to this city." Sebastian finally raised his eyes to meet hers. "You just saved my mother's legacy. But you've also made powerful enemies today." Elena nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The Carrington Empire stood on uncertain ground, with betrayal from within and pressure from without. Whatever came next would reshape not just the company, but the delicate balance of power in Charleston's elite circles. And somehow, the Maid's daughter had become a central player in this high-stakes game. Sebastian Carrington leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin as he studied Elena Rivera across his expansive mahogany desk. The morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office cast sharp shadows across his angular features. "I want you on my legal team," he announced, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "Temporary position. 3 months. You clearly have insights that could be valuable." Elena's eyes widened momentarily before narrowing with suspicion. "Why would you offer me a position when I just publicly challenged you?" "Perhaps because you publicly challenged me," Sebastian replied with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I prefer to keep potential problems where I can see them." The young woman recognized the power play for what it was, a chess move designed to neutralize her, to bring her under his control. Yet the opportunity was too valuable to dismiss. With access to Carrington Enterprises from the inside, she might uncover what her mother had been hinting at for years. "I accept," Elena said finally, extending her hand. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow. 8 sharp." The following morning, Elena entered the gleaming glass headquarters of Carrington Enterprises wearing her only professional outfit, a navy blazer and pencil skirt she'd purchased second-hand for interviews. The security guard's skeptical glance as he checked her temporary badge was just the first of many subtle indignities. The legal department occupied the 32nd floor, a sleek environment of glass partitions and hushed conversations. Department head Victoria Winters greeted her with a brittle smile. "Miss Rivera, Sebastian mentioned you'd be joining us." The pause spoke volumes. "Your desk is in the corner. We're preparing for the Eastwood acquisition. Everyone else has been briefed for weeks, so you'll need to catch up quickly." By lunchtime, Elena had received 3 impossible research assignments, 0 introductions to colleagues, and countless sidelong glances. In the break room, she overheard 2 associates whispering, "Can you believe it? From housekeeping to legal in 1 generation. Must be something special about her to catch the CEO's eye." Elena gripped her coffee cup tighter, but maintained her composure. She'd faced prejudice her entire life, first as the Maid's daughter at an elite private school on scholarship, then as the working-class student at an Ivy League university. This was merely another battlefield. When Sebastian appeared at her desk that afternoon, the entire floor fell silent. "How are you finding your first day?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Challenging," Elena replied evenly, meeting his gaze. "But I've never backed down from a challenge." Something flickered in his eyes. Perhaps respect, perhaps amusement. Either way, both knew this arrangement was just beginning, and neither would emerge unchanged. Ana Rivera's hands trembled as she opened the unmarked envelope that had been slipped beneath her door in the servants' quarters of the Carrington estate. Inside lay a faded photograph and a yellowed letter that instantly transported her 25 years into the past. The photograph showed a much younger Anna standing beside Mrs. Carrington in the estate's rose garden, both women smiling with an intimacy that belied their employer-employee relationship. "Who would send this now?" she whispered, sinking onto her bed. The housekeeper glanced nervously at her small window, suddenly feeling watched. After decades of loyal service to the Carrington family, Anna had become expert at keeping secrets, especially those concerning her daughter and the promise she'd made to Sebastian's mother before her death. The letter was written in elegant script she recognized immediately. "When the time comes, remember what we discussed about Elena's future," it read. "The key is in the piano." Anna's chest tightened. She had hoped this day would never arrive, yet had always known it would. She tucked the items into her apron pocket as footsteps approached her door. Composing herself quickly, the woman greeted another staff member with practiced calm, though her mind raced with implications. This wasn't merely about the past. It threatened the precarious balance Elena had established at Carrington Enterprises. Later that evening, Anna slipped into the music room, where the grand piano stood untouched since Mrs. Carrington's passing. Sebastian rarely entered this space anymore. Too many memories lingered in the polished ebony and ivory keys. She ran her fingers along the instrument's edge, remembering how the late Mrs. Carrington had taught both Sebastian and Elena to play simple melodies when they were children, before social boundaries had fully solidified between them. "I owe you my life," Anna murmured, recalling the day she'd found Mrs. Carrington collapsed in this very room, how she'd called for help just in time. The debt between them had never been financial, but something deeper, a secret pact between women who understood sacrifice. Anna's phone buzzed with a message from Elena. "Working late. Don't wait up." Her daughter had no idea how intertwined her destiny was with the Carringtons, beyond the current contract dispute that had thrust her into Sebastian's world again. The housekeeper carefully refolded the letter, anxiety mounting as she considered what revelations might follow. Some secrets protected, others destroyed. This envelope was merely the first domino in a line that stretched back decades, threatening to topple the carefully constructed walls between the families. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room, knowing the past she'd buried was finally rising to claim its due. Viola Kingston stood at the center of her sunlit parlor, martini glass delicately poised between manicured fingers, surrounded by Charleston's most influential women. Her smile never reached her eyes as she leaned forward conspiratorially. "I simply worry about Sebastian's judgment lately," she murmured. "This Rivera girl appearing from nowhere, and suddenly she's reviewing confidential documents. Quite the coincidence, don't you think?" The socialite had been orchestrating Elena's downfall with surgical precision since the boardroom incident. Each luncheon, charity meeting, and garden party became an opportunity to plant seeds of doubt about the maid's daughter who dared step beyond her station. "My sources say she's been after the Carrington fortune for years," Viola whispered to Marianne Hollingsworth, whose husband sat on 3 corporate boards. By afternoon, the rumor had reached half of Charleston's elite. Elena felt the shift immediately. Walking through Carrington Enterprises' marble lobby, she noticed the stares and sudden silences. Administrative assistants who had been cordial now avoided eye contact. Even in the legal department, documents mysteriously disappeared from her desk, only to reappear hours later, delaying her work. Sebastian remained oblivious, buried in damage control from the postponed merger. "You're imagining things," he told Elena when she mentioned the hostility. "Focus on the contract review." But the campaign escalated when Viola contacted her college roommate at the Charleston Gazette. The following morning, a seemingly innocent profile piece appeared. From maid service to merger meetings, the mysterious Elena Rivera. The article carefully avoided direct accusations while raising questions about her qualifications and sudden influence over Sebastian Carrington. At the Palmetto Club's annual spring luncheon, Elena arrived representing Carrington Enterprises, only to find her place card mysteriously missing. She stood awkwardly as women who had known her only as Ana Rivera's daughter pretended not to see her. "I believe this belongs at the auxiliary table," Viola announced loudly, producing Elena's card with theatrical concern. Someone must have made a mistake. That evening, Elena found Ana sitting at their small kitchen table, hands trembling around a newspaper. "They're saying terrible things about you, mija," her mother whispered. "This is exactly what I feared." Elena took the paper, scanning the society column where Viola had been quoted expressing concerns about unvetted individuals having access to sensitive corporate information. The implication was clear. "She doesn't know who she's dealing with," Elena said, squeezing her mother's shoulder. Later, alone in her room, Elena removed the piano key necklace from its hiding place. The childhood gift from Sebastian's mother reminded her that she had more claim to the Carrington world than anyone suspected. Viola Kingston might control Charleston's social battlefield for now, but Elena had something the socialite would never possess: the truth about both families' intertwined past. Tomorrow would bring another day of whispers and sabotage, but Elena was her mother's daughter, patient, observant, and far stronger than anyone realized. The leather-bound ledger felt heavy in Elena Rivera's hands, its worn edges suggesting years of use. She'd found it tucked behind a row of financial journals in the Carrington Estates library while researching the contract clause that had nearly cost Sebastian his mother's legacy. Working late into the night, she'd been drawn to a particular shelf that seemed oddly arranged. "This can't be coincidence," she whispered, tracing the elegant script on the first page. property of Elizabeth Carrington. Sebastian's mother had been meticulous in her record-keeping, according to Anna. The young lawyer carefully turned the brittle pages, noting dates and figures that didn't align with official Carrington Enterprises records she'd reviewed. Elena's heart raced as she deciphered the coded entries. Elizabeth had used a simple substitution cipher, something Elena recognized from puzzles she'd solved as a child. The decoded notes revealed a network of offshore accounts and hidden assets, carefully protected from both tax authorities and, apparently, certain members of the Carrington board. One name appeared repeatedly beside large transfers: M.R. Elena frowned, trying to place the initials among the board members. The connection to Hartwell International was unmistakable. Elizabeth had documented meetings with their executives dating back 15 years, long before the current merger was proposed. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. Quickly photographing key pages with her smartphone, she returned the ledger to its hiding place just as Alan Prescott appeared in the doorway. "Working late, Miss Rivera?" Sebastian's godfather leaned against the doorframe, his casual pose contradicted by the sharpness in his eyes. "Just familiarizing myself with company history," she replied, clutching her device in her pocket. Alan stepped closer, glancing at the shelves. "History can be misleading. Best to focus on the future, wouldn't you agree?" The implied warning hung between them. Elena nodded politely and gathered her notes. "Of course, Mr. Prescott. Good night." Back in her mother's quarters, Elena examined the photographs. Anna looked up from her sewing, concern etching her features. "What have you found, Misha?" "Something big, Mama. This ledger proves the contract betrayal wasn't improvised. It's been planned for years." She showed her mother the decoded notes. "And someone with the initials MR was involved from the beginning." Anna's face paled as she touched the screen. "Where did you find this?" "Hidden in the library." "Why? Do you know who MR is?" Her mother turned away, hands trembling. "You should tell Sebastian about the ledger. But be careful, Elena. Some secrets are dangerous when exposed." As dawn broke over the Charleston estate, Elena realized the stakes had risen dramatically. This wasn't just about one contract anymore. It was about a conspiracy spanning decades, reaching into the very heart of the Carrington Empire. The Magnolia Ball had been Charleston's premier social event for over a century, and Sebastian Carrington knew exactly what statement he was making by arriving with Elena Rivera on his arm. The grand ballroom of the Heritage Club glittered with chandeliers and old money, conversations momentarily halting as the unlikely pair entered. "They're staring," Elena whispered, her emerald gown, borrowed from a boutique that had eagerly dressed her once learning she'd accompany the CEO, catching the light as she moved. Sebastian leaned closer. "Let them. Half are envious, half are terrified." Elena felt the weight of 100 evaluating gazes. The daughter of a housekeeper now stood among Charleston's elite, not serving champagne, but drinking it. She recognized several board members' wives who had previously looked through her as if she were invisible. "Sebastian, darling," cooed Margaret Hollingsworth, the 70-year-old matriarch of Charleston society. "What an interesting choice of companion tonight." "Elena has been instrumental in protecting Carrington Enterprises recently," he replied smoothly. "I thought it appropriate she experience the traditions our foundation supports." As the evening progressed, Elena navigated the treacherous waters of Southern politeness. Every compliment carried a hidden barb, every question a trap. Yet her years observing from the margins had taught her more than anyone realized. "I adore your accent," said Beatrice Wellington, wife of a prominent banker. "So authentic?" "Thank you," Elena replied with practiced grace. "My mother always said good manners transcend backgrounds." She learned that serving the finest families in Charleston. Sebastian watched from across the room as Elena deftly handled each interaction. The orchestra began a waltz, and he found himself crossing the floor toward her, extending his hand. "May I?" he asked. The ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath as Sebastian guided Elena onto the dance floor. His hand at her waist felt both foreign and familiar. "You're surprisingly good at this," he murmured, as they moved in perfect synchrony. "Your mother insisted Anna's daughter learn proper dancing," Elena replied. "She said everyone should know how to waltz." Something shifted between them as they moved across the polished floor. Memories of piano lessons and secret kindnesses surfacing in the space between words. For a moment they weren't CEO and temporary legal consultant, but simply Sebastian and Elena, connected by a shared past neither fully understood. Later, as they stood on the terrace overlooking Charleston Harbor, Sebastian handed Elena a flute of champagne. To holding your own in the lion's den, he toasted. Elena smiled, the piano key necklace at her throat catching moonlight. The lions weren't nearly as frightening as I expected. The morning after the Magnolia Ball, Elena Rivera arrived at Carrington Enterprises to find the office buzzing with whispers. Her smartphone vibrated incessantly with notifications from every major news outlet in Charleston. The headline made her stomach drop. Carrington CEO's secret affair exposed. Splashed across the screen was a photograph of Sebastian Carrington in what appeared to be an intimate embrace with a blonde woman at what looked like the vineyard. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Only Viola Kingston could have orchestrated something this devastating. "Have you seen it?" Marissa from Legal whispered as Elena passed. "The stock is down 15 points already." Elena hurried to Sebastian's office, finding him standing at the window, shoulders rigid with tension. The CEO didn't turn when she entered. "I never met that woman," he said, voice hollow. "The photo is staged, expertly edited." "Viola?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Sebastian nodded. "Who else?" She called this morning to express her sympathy about the scandal. His laugh was bitter. Said perhaps I should reconsider the merger with Hartwell to stabilize the company during this unfortunate time. On his desk, his cell phone rang continuously. Board members, shareholders, reporters, all demanding explanations. The businessman, who had commanded respect with a single glance, now looked vulnerable, almost lost. "My mother built this company on trust," he said. 20 years of reputation destroyed in one day. Elena moved closer. "We can fight this. I can help." "Haven't you done enough?" Sebastian snapped, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry. This isn't your fault." But they both knew her presence at the gala had accelerated Viola's vengeance. The socialite had struck where it would hurt most, not just Sebastian's heart but his legacy. Alan Prescott burst in without knocking. "Emergency board meeting in 30 minutes. They're talking about a vote of no confidence." He glared at Elena. "I suggest you make yourself scarce, Miss Rivera." After he left, Sebastian loosened his tie. "My father weathered scandals by throwing others under the bus. Is that who I become now?" Elena thought of her mother, who had taught her that character revealed itself in crisis. "Or you show them who you really are," she said quietly. Outside the office windows, reporters gathered at the building entrance. The company's stock price continued its freefall on the monitors. Sebastian straightened his shoulders and buttoned his suit jacket. "Let's go face them," he said, a new resolve in his voice. "Together." Elena hesitated, knowing that walking beside him would forever link her to this scandal in the public eye. But she nodded and followed him toward the boardroom, where the future of Carrington Enterprises hung in the balance. The Carrington vineyard stretched before them, rows of vines disappearing into the mist-shrouded hills of South Carolina. Elena Rivera stood on the veranda of the rustic yet elegant guest house, watching Sebastian Carrington pace the wooden deck, phone pressed to his ear. The Charleston scandal had followed them even here, 100 miles from the city's whispers. "The stock dropped another 2 points," Sebastian said, ending the call and running a hand through his dark hair. "Viola's photograph is doing exactly what she intended." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. The CEO had suggested this retreat as a strategy session, but tension hung between them like the heavy clouds overhead. "Let me show you the cellar," he offered suddenly. "Some of these vines were planted by my grandfather." The underground cellar was cool and dim, filled with oak barrels and dusty bottles. Sebastian moved with practiced ease, selecting a vintage from a private collection. "This was from the year my mother died," he explained, his voice softening. "I've been saving it." As he pulled the cork, the bottle slipped from his grasp, shattering against the stone floor. Red wine spread like blood across the cellar stones. "Damn it!" The outburst was so unlike his usual controlled demeanor that Elena stepped back. "I can't even hold onto a bottle without—" He stopped, composing himself. "It's just wine," she said gently. "It's never just wine, Elena." His eyes met hers. "Nothing between us has ever been simple." The sudden crack of thunder interrupted them. They emerged from the cellar to find rain pouring down in sheets, trapping them in the guest house as night fell. By candlelight, with the power knocked out by the storm, Sebastian finally spoke of his mother's death, of the burden of the Carrington name, and of his suspicions about Alan's true motives. Elena listened, seeing beyond the polished exterior to the man who had once been a lonely boy in a massive estate. "I remember you, he admitted, playing the piano while your mother cleaned. You were better than I was." "I wasn't supposed to touch it," Elena confessed. "But your mother encouraged me." The rain drummed against the roof as old memories surfaced. When lightning illuminated the room, Elena noticed Sebastian staring at the piano key necklace she always wore beneath her blouse. "She gave you that, didn't she?" he asked quietly. "My mother." Elena nodded, unable to speak. By morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the vineyard glistening in sunlight. But something fundamental had shifted between them. Walls crumbling, truths emerging. They returned to Charleston different people, their armor thinner, their alliance stronger, neither fully prepared for what awaited them. Elena Rivera rushed through the marble corridors of the Carrington estate, her heels echoing against the polished floors. The call had come during a crucial meeting. Her mother had collapsed while cleaning the east wing. When she burst into Anna's quarters, the sight of her mother's small frame on the narrow bed made her heart constrict. "The doctor says it's exhaustion and high blood pressure," explained Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper supervisor, her voice laced with genuine concern. "She's been working double shifts all week." Elena sat beside her mother, taking Anna's weathered hand in hers. The older woman's eyes fluttered open, immediately filling with embarrassment. "I'm fine, Mia. Just a little tired," Anna whispered, attempting to sit up. "Don't move, Mama. You need rest." Elena gently pressed her mother back against the pillows. The irony wasn't lost on her. While she'd been fighting to expose corruption in the boardroom, her own mother had been pushing herself to the breaking point below stairs. Dr. Reeves arrived shortly after, prescribing bed rest and medication. "She needs to reduce her stress immediately," he advised, glancing pointedly at Elena. "Family history suggests she's at risk for more serious complications." After the doctor left, Elena sat in silence, watching her mother drift into an uneasy sleep. The woman who had sacrificed everything to give her daughter opportunities was now paying the physical price. The weight of guilt pressed down on Elena's shoulders. Her smartphone vibrated, Sebastian calling for the third time. The CEO was waiting for her analysis of Alan Prescott's financial reports, documents that might finally expose the Godfather's deception. The investigation was reaching its critical phase. Elena silenced the device, torn between worlds. Every hour she spent pursuing justice at Carrington Enterprises meant leaving her mother alone, vulnerable. Yet abandoning the fight now meant the powerful would continue exploiting the powerless. People like her mother. Anna stirred, mumbling something about needing to prepare the dining room for tomorrow's breakfast. "Even in her sleep she's working," Elena whispered to herself, smoothing back her mother's graying hair. Outside the window she could see the lights of the main house where Sebastian was undoubtedly pacing his office. The distance between the servants' quarters and the mansion had never felt more significant, or more meaningless. Elena pulled out the ledger she'd been analyzing. The pages contained evidence that could topple Alan's position and secure her own. But as she looked from the document to her mother's exhausted face, the victory she'd been chasing suddenly seemed hollow. "What good is winning if I lose you in the process?" she whispered. The true cost of ambition was becoming painfully clear. Elena closed the ledger, making a decision that would alter the course of her crusade. Some battles, she realized, demanded too great a sacrifice. Alan Prescott paced the length of the boardroom, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows did nothing to warm the chill that had settled over Carrington Enterprises since the contract debacle. "This delay is costing us millions," Alan announced, spreading financial projections across the table. "The board needs to reconsider the Hartwell merger immediately." Elena Rivera watched from her temporary seat at the corner of the massive oak table. 2 weeks into her position on the legal team, she'd earned grudging respect from some colleagues, though most still viewed the maid's daughter as an interloper. She clutched her leather portfolio containing photocopies from the ledger she'd discovered, Sebastian's mother's careful accounting, and coded notes that had kept her awake for 3 nights straight. "Actually," Elena said, rising to her feet, "I believe we should discuss the audit first." Sebastian Carrington's head snapped up, his expression a careful mask. "What audit?" "The one I authorized yesterday," she replied, maintaining eye contact with the CEO. "As per Section 12 of the company bylaws, any legal team member can request financial verification before major acquisitions." Alan's face flushed crimson. "This is preposterous. You have no authority." "She does," interrupted Margot Chen, the chief financial officer. And the preliminary findings are concerning. The CFO distributed folders containing spreadsheets highlighting discrepancies in 6 separate accounts, all connected to projects Alan had overseen. Sebastian flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening with each turn. $3 million diverted from the Foundation's endowment, he said quietly. $5 million in unexplained consulting fees to shell companies. The CEO looked up at his godfather, betrayal etched across his features. Explain this, Alan. The older man loosened his tie. Creative accounting. Nothing unusual for corporations our size. Elena stepped forward. The pattern matches notations in your mother's ledger, Sebastian. This has been happening for decades. The room fell silent as Sebastian absorbed this revelation. His family's legacy, the empire he'd dedicated his life to preserving, had been corrupted from within long before he took the helm. You were never going to let me see the real contract with Hartwell, were you? Sebastian asked Alan. You wouldn't understand the necessary compromises? Compromises? Sebastian's voice cut like steel. You mean theft? Elena watched the confrontation unfold, understanding that this victory came with a cost. The Carrington Empire wasn't just threatened by outside forces. Its foundation had been slowly eroding from within for years. As board members exchanged alarmed glances, she realized they'd only scratched the surface of the corruption. The audit had turned the tide against Alan, but the battle for Carrington Enterprises had only just begun. The boardroom at Carrington Enterprises crackled with tension as Sebastian Carrington stood at the head of the mahogany table, his knuckles white against the polished surface. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the faces of the board members. I'm prepared to buy out your shares, Alan. Name your price, Sebastian said, his voice carrying the practiced calm of a man accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. Elena Rivera watched from her seat, noting how the CEO's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had spent the previous night reviewing the ledger entries, preparing for this confrontation. Alan Prescott leaned back in his leather chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You think this is about money, Sebastian? How disappointingly predictable. The older man's confidence was unsettling. Your father would have recognized the bigger picture. Leave my father out of this, Sebastian warned, his southern drawl becoming more pronounced as his composure slipped. But he's precisely the point, Alan countered, sliding a weathered folder across the table. 23 years ago, William Carrington orchestrated a nearly identical maneuver against his own partners. The Prescotts were merely collateral damage. Elena reached for the folder, her fingers brushing against Sebastian's as they both moved toward it. The documents inside revealed contracts with signatures she recognized from the ledger. William Carrington's bold strokes alongside notations in Alan's younger hand. Your righteous indignation is touching, Alan continued, addressing the room rather than just Sebastian. But the Carrington legacy you're so desperate to protect was built on the same tactics you're condemning today. Sebastian's face drained of color as he scanned the documents. The boardroom fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Is this true? Elena asked quietly, meeting Sebastian's gaze. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes revealing a storm of doubt. I was 15 when my father died. There were rumors. Nothing concrete. Nothing concrete, because William was smarter than you, Alan said. He understood that sentiment has no place in business. Elena watched as something fractured in Sebastian's carefully maintained facade. The man who had always seemed so certain now looked lost, confronting a legacy far more complicated than the polished narrative he'd inherited. The Carrington name means something in Charleston, Sebastian finally said, his voice barely audible. Yes, Alan agreed. It means power at any cost. Don't pretend you didn't know. Elena realized then that the corruption she'd been fighting wasn't just about one contract or one betrayal. It was systemic, generations deep, woven into the very fabric of the enterprise. The rot had been there all along, hidden beneath the veneer of Southern propriety and family, honor. As the meeting dissolved into heated arguments, Elena caught Sebastian's eye across the table. For the first time, she saw him not as the untouchable CEO, but as someone facing the same painful question she was. How do you rebuild when the foundation itself is compromised? The boardroom fell silent as the Chinese investors exchanged glances, clearly unimpressed with the translation software's clumsy interpretation of their concerns. Elena Rivera watched the tension build across Sebastian Carrington's face as the potential 8-figure deal began slipping away. Without thinking, she leaned forward. "Qing Yunshu Wo," she said, her Mandarin flowing effortlessly. The investor's expressions transformed from frustration to surprise as Elena explained the nuances of the contract terms with perfect pronunciation and cultural sensitivity. For 20 minutes, she navigated complex negotiations, addressing concerns about intellectual property protections that the translation software had butchered. The lead investor, impressed by her command of both language and legal details, nodded approvingly. "We accept these terms," he said finally in English, extending his hand toward Sebastian. The CEO's composed mask couldn't hide his astonishment. As the investors departed, murmurs rippled through the boardroom. Alan Prescott's face darkened with suspicion, while board members exchanged impressed glances. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" Sebastian asked when they were alone, his tone a mixture of admiration and wariness. "Community college," Elena replied simply. "Mom worked extra shifts so I could take night classes. I thought international business would be my ticket out of—" She gestured vaguely, meaning the service role she'd been expected to inherit. Sebastian studied her with new eyes. "You're full of surprises, Ms. Rivera." Later that afternoon, while organizing files in Sebastian's office, Elena discovered an old photograph that had slipped between cabinet drawers. She froze, recognizing the children in the image, herself at 6 years old sitting beside a young Sebastian at the grand piano in the East Wing. His mother stood behind them, her gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. The memory rushed back, Anna bringing her daughter to work during a school holiday, Sebastian's mother inviting the shy girl to join her son's piano lesson. That was the day Sebastian had given her the piano key necklace she'd treasured for years. When Sebastian entered and saw her holding the photograph, his steps faltered. "I'd forgotten about this," he said quietly, taking the photo from her hands. "Mother always said you had a gift for music." "And you had a gift for making me feel like I belonged," Elena replied, her fingers unconsciously reaching for the necklace she no longer wore. Something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of a connection that predated their current roles. The revelation of their shared history hung in the air, complicating the already tangled web of loyalty and ambition that bound them. "We should talk about this," Sebastian said, slipping the photograph into his desk drawer. "But not here. Not now." Elena nodded, understanding that in the Carrington world, timing was everything, and some conversations were too dangerous to have within these walls. Ana Rivera sat on the edge of her hospital bed, her hands trembling as she held the yellowed envelope. Elena knelt beside her, concern etched across her face. The older woman's eyes welled with tears as memories flooded back. "I never told you about that day," Anna whispered. 20 years ago, when Mrs. Carrington collapsed in the garden. I found her, called the ambulance. The doctors said those minutes saved her life." Elena squeezed her mother's hand, piecing together the fragments of a story she'd never heard. Anna continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Before she passed, Sebastian's mother gave me this letter. She made me promise to keep it sealed until the right time." She handed the envelope to her daughter. "It's addressed to you, Mihija." With trembling fingers, Elena opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and trust fund documentation. Her eyes widened as she scanned the elegant script. "There's a trust fund in my name?" "From Mrs. Carrington?" Elena's voice cracked with disbelief. Anna nodded slowly. She knew something was happening with the company finances. She suspected someone was manipulating accounts. Elena pulled out the letter, reading aloud. "The initials MR in my ledger will lead you to the truth. Trust no one until you understand what he was protecting." "MR," Elena repeated, the realization dawning slowly. "Marcus Rivera. My father." Anna's shoulders slumped as the secret she'd carried for decades finally emerged. "Your father wasn't just a gardener, as I told you. He was an accountant for Carrington Enterprises, brilliant with numbers. He discovered irregularities in the books, discrepancies that implicated powerful people. The hospital room seemed to shrink around them as Elena processed this revelation. Her estranged father, the man she barely remembered, had been at the center of the financial web she was now untangling. When he threatened to expose what he found, he was forced to leave. "I stayed to protect you, to keep you close to what was rightfully yours." Anna's voice broke. Mrs. Carrington knew. She created the trust fund in secret. Elena stared at the documentation, her mind racing. The ledger entries suddenly made sense, coded references to accounts her father had flagged, transactions he'd questioned. "This changes everything," she whispered. "The contract, the merger, Alan's desperation. It's all connected to what my father discovered." Anna reached for her daughter's hand. "Be careful, Elena. The same people who drove your father away are still in that boardroom." Outside the hospital window, Charleston's evening lights twinkled, like distant warnings. The Carrington estate loomed on the horizon, its secrets no longer safely buried in the past. The air in the Carrington Enterprises boardroom crackled with tension as Elena Rivera placed the documents on the polished mahogany table. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced. The papers, financial records she had spent 3 sleepless nights piecing together, told a story more twisted than anyone had imagined. "Viola Kingston isn't just Sebastian's fiancée," Elena announced, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "She's a silent investor in Hartwell International, with a 7% stake." Sebastian Carrington's face drained of color. He reached for the documents, his normally composed demeanor fracturing as he scanned the evidence. The CEO's shoulders tensed visibly as the betrayal sank in. "For how long?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. 3 years, Elena replied. "Before you even proposed." The revelation cast Viola's actions in a sinister light. Her campaign against Elena, the leaked photographs, the social sabotage, all calculated moves to ensure the merger went through. The socialite hadn't merely been acting out of jealousy. She'd been protecting a multi-million-dollar investment. "She was placed in your life deliberately," Elena continued, gentler now. "Hartwell has been playing the long game." Alan Prescott shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The older man avoided Sebastian's gaze, suddenly fascinated by his cufflinks. His complicity was becoming clearer by the minute. "The Charleston Courier received an anonymous tip about your family's vineyard property being leveraged as collateral," Elena added. "Only someone intimate with your financial arrangements would know that detail." Sebastian stood abruptly, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charleston harbor. "She had access to everything," he murmured. "My calendar, my home, my trust." Elena approached him cautiously. "This goes beyond Viola. The network extends to at least 3 board members, and possibly your banking team." For a moment they stood side by side, reflections ghosted in the glass. The outsider and the CEO, unlikely allies in a storm neither had anticipated. "The foundation was my mother's legacy," Sebastian said finally. "I won't let them take it." Elena nodded. "Then we fight back. Together." Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. The battle lines were redrawn. This was no longer about a contract or a merger. It was about reclaiming what had been nearly stolen through years of calculated deception. "Call an emergency board meeting," Sebastian instructed, straightening his tie. "And Elena," he paused, the ghost of a smile crossing his face, "wear that red dress, the one from the Magnolia Ball. We're going to need all the confidence we can get." Elena Rivera sat frozen in the Carrington Enterprises legal library, staring at the document in her hands. The yellow deed transfer from 20 years ago bore her mother's signature, Anna Rivera, in faded blue ink. During a complex financial restructuring to protect assets from a potential lawsuit, the Carrington estate had been temporarily deeded in her mother's name for 6 months. "This can't be right," she whispered, running her finger along the legal language. The young lawyer had been digging through property records for days, searching for anything that might strengthen their position against Lucas and his conspirators. What she found instead was something far more powerful. Sebastian leaned against the mahogany table, his usual composure faltering as he examined the document. "My father never mentioned this arrangement. It was during his illness. Alan must have handled it." "According to these papers," Elena explained, "the deed was never properly transferred back. There was a filing error." She pointed to the county clerk's notation. "Technically, my mother still holds a 5% interest in the estate itself, which translates to a stakeholder position in Carrington Enterprises." The CEO paced the room, running his hand through his dark hair. "Alan knew. He must have. That's why he's been so desperate to keep you away from the company records." Elena's mind raced through the implications. Her mother, a housekeeper who had spent decades cleaning the very rooms she partially owned, had never known. The irony wasn't lost on her. All those years Anna had worked for the Carringtons, she'd actually been working on property that was partly hers. Does this change anything for you? Sebastian asked quietly, studying her face. Everything, she admitted. I came here wanting justice, but I never imagined having an actual legal claim. The daughter of immigrants now held leverage over one of Charleston's oldest families. The balance of power had shifted in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Sebastian's smartphone buzzed with messages from the board members, but he ignored them. We need to be strategic about how we use this information. Elena nodded, gathering the documents carefully. This gives us the ammunition we need against Lucas and Viola. They can't force any decisions without stakeholder approval now. The board meeting is tomorrow, Sebastian said. Are you ready to claim your seat at the table? Elena thought of her mother, working her fingers raw for decades, always with dignity despite being treated as invisible. She thought of all the times doors had been closed in her face because she didn't belong to the right social circles. I've been ready my whole life, she said, standing taller. They just didn't know it yet. The truth descended upon the Carrington estate like a thunderclap. Lucas Carrington stood in the center of Sebastian's study, his posture defiant, yet somehow relieved, as if unburdened by the weight of his secret machinations. The younger half-brother's features, so similar to Sebastian's yet sharper, more angular, reflected years of perceived slights and exclusion. You orchestrated all of this, Sebastian said, his voice dangerously quiet. The contract. Alan, even Viola. Lucas smiled thinly. Impressive detective work, though I suspect your new legal advisor deserves the credit. He nodded toward Elena Rivera, who stood beside Sebastian, documents clutched in her hand. Why? Elena asked. The question hung in the air between them. Why? Lucas echoed, pacing the Persian rug. Because our father built this empire for both his sons, not just the golden child. Yet here I am, relegated to meaningless board positions while you control everything. Sebastian's jaw tightened. You were given every opportunity. I was given scraps. Lucas slammed his fist against the mahogany desk. Do you know what it's like living in your shadow? The perfect heir, the chosen one. Elena watched the brothers, seeing beyond their designer suits to the wounded children beneath. The younger Carrington had masterfully manipulated both Alan Prescott and Viola Kingston, playing on the godfather's greed and the socialite's ambition. The Hartwell deal was brilliant, really, Lucas continued, regaining composure. Transfer the foundation through a hidden clause, then use those assets as leverage to force a leadership change. The board would have had no choice but to reconsider my position. Sebastian moved to the window, Charleston's skyline glittering beyond. You would destroy our mother's legacy for a seat at the table? I would reclaim my birthright, Lucas countered. Elena stepped forward. And Alan and Viola? Were they willing participants? Alan saw dollar signs. Viola saw herself as the future Mrs. CEO. Whether that CEO was Sebastian or me. Lucas shrugged. Self-interest makes for reliable allies. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Outside, a gardener trimmed the estate's hedges, oblivious to the family drama unfolding within. The Carrington name, so respected in Charleston society, now faced its greatest threat from within. What happens now? Lucas asked, his bravado faltering slightly. Sebastian turned from the window, his expression unreadable. That depends. We can continue this war, tearing apart everything our parents built, or, Lucas prompted, or we acknowledge the fractures and begin to heal them. Sebastian extended his hand, not as CEO and board member, as brothers. Elena held her breath as the two men stared at each other across generations of rivalry and resentment. The choice before them would determine not just the future of Carrington Enterprises, but the legacy of a family that had defined Charleston for decades. Sebastian Carrington stood by the window of his office, watching the Charleston sunset paint the sky in amber hues. When Elena Rivera entered, he didn't turn immediately. I need to tell you something, he said, voice barely audible. I knew about the discrepancies in the contract. Not the full extent, but enough to raise questions. Elena froze, her hand still on the doorknob. You knew? The CEO finally faced her, exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. 3 weeks before the signing, legal flagged some inconsistencies. I dismissed their concerns, told them to expedite the review. He ran a hand through his immaculate hair, disheveling it for the first time since Elena had known him. Pride? Exhaustion? Arrogance? Take your pick. I wanted the merger completed before the quarter ended. Why tell me this now? She asked, approaching his desk cautiously. Because we can't confront them with half-truths between us. Sebastian's admission seemed to physically lighten him, as though releasing a burden he'd carried too long. My father built this company on secrets. I won't make the same mistake. Elena nodded, touching the piano key necklace at her throat. We all have our blind spots. I was so focused on exposing the conspiracy that I nearly destroyed my mother's health. Their shared vulnerability created a new foundation between them. Not the polished facade of corporate allies, but something raw and honest. They'll be here in 20 minutes, Sebastian said, straightening his tie. Alan, Viola, Lucas, all expecting different outcomes. Elena spread the documents across his desk, the ledger with its coded notations, the trust fund paperwork establishing her stake in the company, and the contract with its damning hidden clause. Your mother knew something like this might happen, she said. That's why she arranged for that 10% to be held in trust. When the conspirators arrived, the boardroom became an arena. Lucas Carrington entered last, his resemblance to Sebastian striking, yet distorted by bitterness. This is a waste of time, Alan Prescott declared, adjusting his gold cufflinks. The board has already. The board will be interested to learn about these financial discrepancies, Elena interrupted, sliding the ledger forward. Viola Kingston's perfect composure slipped momentarily. Whatever game you're playing. No more games, Sebastian cut in. Elena owns 10% of Carrington Enterprises. I own 51. Together, we control the company. Lucas laughed coldly. You're trusting the Maid's daughter with your family legacy? I'm trusting the woman who saved it, Sebastian replied, his hand finding Elena's beneath the table. By meeting's end, Alan had resigned, Viola had stormed out, and Lucas sat defeated. The Carrington empire remained intact, but fundamentally changed, like its CEO and the woman who had shouted across a boardroom and altered everything. The Charleston business community buzzed with anticipation as the announcement spread through elite circles. Elena Rivera stood on the marble steps of the newly renovated east wing of Carrington Enterprises, her posture reflecting a confidence that had been hard-won over months of struggle. The morning sun caught the piano key necklace at her throat, no longer a hidden memento but worn proudly as a symbol of her journey. Ms. Rivera, the board has unanimously voted to offer you a permanent seat, Sebastian Carrington announced, his voice carrying across the gathered press. 10% ownership, as stipulated in my mother's trust fund documentation. The young woman smiled, but shook her head. I'm declining the board position, she stated, causing whispers to ripple through the crowd. Instead, I'm establishing the Ana Rivera Foundation for Financial Empowerment. Sebastian's expression softened as he watched her address the crowd. The CEO had weathered the storm of scandal with newfound resilience, his tailored suit no longer armor, but simply clothing. The corporate empire had been saved, the fraudulent contract nullified, and Hartwell International's takeover thwarted. The foundation will provide scholarships, mentorship, and career development for working-class women entering finance, Elena explained. My mother spent decades working in the shadows of wealth. This foundation ensures others can step into the light. Ana Rivera dabbed at her eyes from the front row, hardly believing the transformation of her life. The former housekeeper had gone from fearing exposure of old secrets to being celebrated for her years of quiet dignity and service. Behind the scenes, the changes at Carrington Enterprises were equally profound. Lucas had been removed from any connection to the family business, while Alan Prescott had resigned in disgrace. Viola Kingston had retreated to New York, her social media conspicuously silent about her former fiancé. The funding comes from my inheritance, Elena continued, but the vision belongs to all of us who believe talent shouldn't be limited by circumstance. Sebastian stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. Carrington Enterprises will match the foundation's funding for the first 5 years, he announced, surprising even Elena. Their partnership had evolved beyond the boardroom drama that had first thrown them together. No longer defined by power imbalances or family secrets, they had forged something neither had anticipated, a bond of mutual respect and hard-earned trust. As Elena cut the ceremonial ribbon, cameras flashed and applause erupted. She glanced at Sebastian, remembering the day she had shouted across his boardroom, halting his signature on that fateful contract. The journey from that moment to this one had changed them both irrevocably. Ready for what comes next? He asked quietly. Elena nodded, her smile genuine. For the first time, absolutely. Spring blossomed across Charleston, painting the Carrington estate in vibrant hues of renewal. The grand mansion, once a symbol of untouchable privilege, now stood with doors flung wide to welcome the changing season. The annual blessing of the harvest ceremony, a tradition dating back generations, unfolded on the sprawling south lawn. But this year carried a profound difference. Elena Rivera and Anna stood side by side with Sebastian Carrington, not as staff, but as honored guests. The mother and daughter who had once navigated these grounds as invisible caretakers now commanded respect from Charleston's elite. Anna, dressed in a tailored cream suit rather than her former uniform, accepted congratulations on the success of the Ana Rivera Foundation with quiet dignity. "Your mother would have loved this," Sebastian whispered to Elena as they watched workers raise glasses in celebration. The CEO had abandoned his usual formal attire for a more relaxed linen shirt, his transformation mirroring that of his estate, less rigid, more authentic. Elena nodded, remembering how different last spring had been, before the contract, before the boardroom confrontation that had altered everything. "She saw something worth saving in both of us," she replied. Across the lawn, several board members engaged in animated conversation with scholarship recipients from Elena's foundation. The young women, daughters of service workers and immigrants, represented the bridge Elena had built between worlds. Even Lucas, following months of family therapy, stood awkwardly at the periphery, his path to redemption still unfolding. The celebration continued as twilight descended. Lanterns illuminated the gardens where Elena had once hidden to study business books borrowed from the library. Now those same pathways hosted discussions about next quarter's initiatives and community partnerships. "Sometimes I still can't believe we're here," Anna confessed to her daughter as they shared a quiet moment near the rose garden. "From where we started to where we are now." Elena squeezed her mother's hand. "We were always meant to be here, just not in the way anyone expected." As the evening breeze carried the scent of magnolias across the lawn, Elena found herself alone on the terrace. Sebastian approached, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. The sunlight, golden in its final moments, caught the piano key pendant at Elena's throat, the childhood token that had survived years of separation. "To new traditions," Sebastian offered, his eyes reflecting something deeper than partnership. Elena touched the necklace, feeling its familiar weight. "And to old promises kept." The pendant gleamed, a simple object transformed into something precious by shared history and renewed purpose. Like the estate around them, like their own intertwined lives, it stood as testament to what could be built when walls came down and truth prevailed. A future neither inherited nor stolen, but created together.